The laughter hit my chest like a closed fist. Not sharp, heavy, the kind that presses down and doesn't let you breathe. My father had just called the last 4 years of my life Lauren's experimental phase, and the entire table was nodding along like he'd said something wise. I felt my jaw lock, molars pressing together so hard my ears rang. Beneath the tablecloth, my hands flattened against my thighs, fingers digging into the fabric of my dress. I didn't move. I didn't blink. But something behind my ribs went cold and still, the way water freezes from the inside out. My name is Natalie Brennan. I'm 31, and I built a logistics platform that 3 countries are fighting to regulate. This is the story of how I made my family choke on every word they ever said about me. The private dining room smelled like seared steak and expensive cologne, my father's preferred atmosphere for performing success. Dark wood panels, low amber lighting, the kind of restaurant where the menu doesn't list prices because if you have to ask, you shouldn't be here. My parents had reserved it for my brother Marcus's engagement dinner. The woman sitting across from me, Rebecca Walsh, was about to become family. She didn't know yet what that actually meant. I was seated 2 chairs from the head of the table, close enough to be visible, far enough to be forgotten. Natalie's always been a dreamer, my mother added, her voice silk-wrapped condescension. She touched my arm like I was a child who'd wandered into an adult conversation. Some people just take longer to find their footing. I watched Marcus smirk into his wine glass. He didn't even bother hiding it anymore. Why would he? He'd spent 33 years being the answer to every question our parents asked about the future. The business, the legacy, the son who showed up in the right clothes, said the right things, married the right woman. I was the footnote, the contrast, the cautionary tale they trotted out to make his accomplishments shine brighter. We offered to help, my father continued, waving his hand like he was being generous. Set her up with some contacts, get her into something stable. But Natalie likes doing things her own way. He chuckled. Whatever that means. The table laughed again. Politely, the way people do when they're not sure if they're supposed to. I didn't flinch. I'd stopped flinching years ago. Instead, I focused on the details, the way the candle flame bent slightly toward the air vent, the faint scratch on my bread plate, the condensation sliding down my water glass. Anchors. I'd learned to survive these dinners by making myself smaller than the furniture, but tonight was different. Tonight, I'd chosen to be here. 3 weeks ago, Marcus had called me, voice dripping with that particular concern that always meant he was about to insult me. The engagement dinner is coming up, he'd said. Rebecca's family will be there. I just want to make sure you're prepared. Maybe Mom could help you pick out something appropriate? I'd told him I'd figure it out. What I didn't tell him was that I'd already figured out everything. I knew exactly who Rebecca Walsh was. I knew her firm had been trying to schedule a meeting with my company for 11 months. I knew her managing partner had called my platform the most significant supply chain innovation in a decade. I knew all of this because staying invisible had always been my greatest advantage. My parents never asked what I actually did. They'd decided years ago that I was the uncertain one, the one who needed guidance, the one who hadn't quite figured out how the world worked, and I let them believe it. Not because I was weak, because I was building something that couldn't survive their noise. For 4 years, I'd worked in silence. 16-hour days, calls at 3 a.m. with partners in Singapore and Hamburg. I turned down interviews, declined conference invitations, kept my name off press releases. The work demanded anonymity. One wrong headline, one leaked detail, and months of negotiation would collapse. So when my family offered money, advice, connections, I smiled and declined. I let them shake their heads. I let them whisper. Letting them underestimate me was safer than explaining myself to people who'd already written the ending. Now, watching my father perform his disappointment for an audience, I felt the familiar heat climb my neck, but beneath it, something else. Patience. I'd been patient for 4 years. I could be patient for 1 more hour. Across the table, Rebecca hadn't laughed with the others. She was watching me, not with pity, but with something sharper. Curiosity. Her eyes moved between my face and my hands, reading the tension I thought I'd hidden. I recognized that look. I'd seen it in boardrooms, on video calls, in the careful pauses before someone asked a question they already knew the answer to. "Natalie," she said, cutting through my father's next anecdote, "what is it you do exactly?" The table went quiet. Not silent, quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when someone breaks an unspoken rule. Marcus jumped in immediately. "It's some tech thing," he said, waving his hand. "She's been experimenting with different projects." "Startups," my mother added helpfully. "You know how that world is. So unpredictable." Rebecca didn't look at them. Her eyes stayed on me. "I'm asking Natalie." I set my water glass down slowly, deliberately. The movement bought me 3 seconds to decide how much to reveal. "Logistics," I said. "Supply chain optimization." Rebecca's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. "What kind of scope?" "International." Marcus laughed. Too loud, too fast. "She's being modest. Natalie's never been great at selling herself." "I'm not selling anything," I said quietly. She asked a question. I answered it. The table fell silent again. My father's smile flickered. Rebecca leaned forward slightly, and I saw the exact moment she made the connection, the slight widening of her pupils, the way her lips parted before pressing together, the unconscious tilt of her head. "Wait," she breathed. "Natalie Brennan, NB Freight Solutions." I didn't nod. I didn't need to. My brother's fiancé was staring at me like I'd just materialized out of thin air. "You're the founder." The word landed on the table like a brick. My mother's hand slipped off my arm. My father's glass froze halfway to his mouth. Marcus made a sound that wasn't quite a word. "I don't," my father started. "We've been trying to get a meeting for almost a year," Rebecca continued, her voice shifting into something professional, almost reverent. "Your platform rerouted emergency medical supplies during the southeastern floods last spring. 3 hospitals would have run out of critical equipment without that intervention. My firm handled the insurance logistics afterward. We saw the internal reports." She reached for her phone, tapped the screen, and turned it toward the center of the table. "An industry publication. No photos of me. I'd made sure of that, but the headline was clear enough. Silent Disruptor. How one platform is reshaping global supply chains." $47 million in secured contracts, Rebecca said, reading from the article. "Operational in 12 countries. 3 acquisition offers declined in the past 18 months. She looked up at me. "You turned down a buyout from Hendricks International." "It wasn't the right fit," I said. The silence that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced in this family. Not the silence of being ignored, the silence of being seen. My father set his glass down with a small, sharp sound. "Why didn't you tell us?" I looked at him then. Really looked. At the confusion creasing his forehead, the way his hands had curled into loose fists on the tablecloth, the dawning recognition that he'd spent years crafting a story about me that had never been true. "You never asked," I said. "You assumed." "But the money," my mother started. "I didn't need your money." "The apartment," my father tried, "is a strategy. I don't advertise." I picked up my napkin, folded it once, and set it beside my plate. "You thought I was struggling because I wasn't performing success the way you wanted. I was just building something that couldn't survive your attention." Marcus stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. "This is insane. If this was real, someone would have told us. Someone would have known." "People did know," Rebecca said, her voice cool. "The people who needed to know." She looked at Marcus with an expression I couldn't quite read. Disappointment, maybe, or recalculation. "You never mentioned your sister was in logistics." "Because I didn't know." His voice cracked on the last word. "You didn't know," I agreed, standing slowly, "because you never wanted to know. You wanted me to be the cautionary tale, the contrast that made you look better, and I let you believe it, not because I needed your approval, but because I needed you to stay out of my way." My mother's face had gone pale. She reached toward me, then stopped, her hand hovering in the air like she didn't know where to put it. "Natalie, sweetheart, we only wanted—" "You wanted me to be manageable," I finished. "Predictable. Someone you could explain at dinner parties as the one who needed a little extra time." I straightened my jacket. "I'm not that person. I never was." The private dining room felt smaller now, the dark wood walls pressing in. Around us, the ambient noise of the restaurant continued, glasses clinking, quiet conversation. But at our table, nothing moved. I turned to Rebecca. "It was nice to meet you," I said. "Genuinely. If you want that meeting, have your office reach out through the proper channels. I'll make sure it gets scheduled." She nodded once, something like respect in her expression. "I will." I didn't look at my family again. I walked out of the private room through the main dining area past the hostess who smiled without knowing what had just happened behind those doors. The night air hit my face like cold water. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, letting my pulse slow, feeling the weight of 20 years of silence finally lifting. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. I thought about the years I'd spent shrinking myself to fit into rooms that were never built for me. The holiday barbecues where my father's voice rose above the music, turning me into a punchline. The networking dinners I wasn't invited to because my presence might make things uncomfortable. The careful, surgical way my family had carved me out of their definition of success. I thought about all the nights I'd worked alone in my apartment, the hum of my laptop, the only company, building something that would outlast every joke they'd ever made at my expense. And I thought about the look on my father's face when he realized he'd spent 4 years pitching unsolicited advice to someone who'd declined offers worth more than his entire portfolio. Some revenges are loud. Mine was quieter than that. I simply became undeniable. In the weeks that followed, the silence from my family was deafening. No group texts, no voicemails. The story they'd been telling about me for decades had collapsed, and they didn't know how to write a new one. When my mother finally called, her voice trembled with the effort of pretending nothing had changed. She asked questions that weren't really questions, attempts to regain footing in a conversation she no longer controlled. I answered politely, briefly. I didn't fill the gaps for her anymore. My father never called at all. His silence, I realized, was its own kind of admission. Marcus never reached out. I heard through a cousin that the engagement dinner became a story that got edited in the retelling, trimmed and smoothed until my revelation was barely mentioned. The same cousin told me some months later that Rebecca had ended the engagement, quietly, professionally, citing incompatible values. I didn't mind. I didn't need credit. I needed distance. What surprised me was how light everything felt. For years, I'd carried the weight of their expectations like stones in my pockets. Not the expectations they had for me, but the expectations they'd never bothered to have. The absence of belief is its own kind of burden. Now, sitting in my office as the morning light slanted through the windows, I understood something clearly. Resolution doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it looks like walking out of a restaurant and never explaining yourself again. Sometimes it looks like building a life so complete that the people who dismissed you become irrelevant to it. I used to believe that being accepted by my family would make me feel whole, that if they finally saw me, really saw me, some broken piece would click into place. I don't believe that anymore. I am not the story they told about me. I never was. I was just patient enough to wait for the moment when they'd have to admit it. If you've ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to know you best, I want you to understand something. Their blindness says nothing about your light. The people who refuse to see you don't get to define what you become. Build quietly if you need to. Protect your work from noise. And when the time comes, when you're ready, let them see exactly what they missed. Before you go, here's a quick bonus for sticking around. If you love learning and growing like I do, you need to try audiobooks. I've got an exclusive deal with Audible. Your first month is completely free. That's access to over 500,000 titles. Zero cost to you. All the details are waiting in the description. Don't miss this one.